Hello and welcome to today's video. So this time what I wanted to do is give you 40 years of collecting vintage paperback experience. Some of the things that I think you should avoid, some of the things I definitely think you should be doing. So sit back, relax, and let's get to it. So I'm speaking as a collector with some experience. Over the years, I've had possibly 100,000 books through my hands, both as a collector, as a book dealer, as a bookseller, and I've seen a lot of changes over that time. I've certainly seen the demise of many secondhand bookshops, but also the rise of internet sites such as ABE Books and eBay, of course. So I think a good place to start would be how I became a vintage paperback collector. This may have slight similarities to how you became a paperback collector or are thinking about getting into collecting vintage paperbacks, but certainly I think the origins are quite interesting. So I think the very earliest books I ever collected were perhaps the Roger Hargreaves Mr. Men books. Now I think there was maybe 6 or 8 released on that initial run, possibly in about 1973, I believe. And I seem to remember having the very earliest books. There was 8 different Mr. Men on the back, some of the original ones like Mr. Strong, Mr. Bump, Mr. Tickle. And I remember there was a picture of each like character on the back, and each character had its own book. And I remember with my mum trying to collect them. Back then I think they were about 10p for a book, so quite some time ago. But then of course I started watching Doctor Who. Now I remember watching the end of John Pertwee and him regenerating into Tom Baker quite well as a kid, and I realised that the books, the Target books, some of which we've got here, had, they did adaptations of those stories. So I made it my job then to read as much Doctor Who as I possibly could, and I think I probably learned how to read properly through reading the Doctor Who books. And there was a thing called the Doctor Who Monster Book, and on the back cover of it, it had pictures of all the Doctor Who books up to like a certain period, about 1975, 76, and I absolutely pored over that one. I made it a point of trying to get all those original books with like the original Chrysokilos jackets here, and absolutely have always loved the Doctor Who books and still do to this day. But I think that was probably my absolute origin of the first sort of books that I ever collected, and not just paperbacks, but books in general. So I started properly collecting vintage paperbacks, and by this I mean old Pan books and old Penguin books, pretty much when I was at school. My mum gave me her collection of vintage Agatha Christie paperbacks. Now, I remember vividly there was a box of these, and I reckon maybe half of them were old Pan editions. Some of them were the black and green Collins crime ones from the 50s. They were reprint ones. And also there was some great Fontana editions with those great grotesque Tom Adams covers, and they were really something quite special. There was a string of big Agatha Christie movies during the 70s, which I remember going to see, and they were always on TV. And that sort of sowed the seed really of these like amazing old paperbacks. Now around the same time, I also got my hands on my dad's paperbacks, and he once again had all the James Bond books plus some of the related books as well, and they were Pan as well. And I started to notice that, particularly with the Pan books, that they had series numbers. I thought, what's all this about? But it was predominantly those amazing jackets containing great books. And I think that's, at a very young age, it sowed the seed of why I started collecting paperbacks. The other thing, and this also coincided with my love of science fiction, as well as, Doctor Who being science fiction, in my school library, they had the old Penguin editions of the Quatermass books, and also Day of the Triffids and some other John Wyndham books, and I read all of those. And I noticed that they were published by Penguin, and they also had like series numbers, because these were fairly old editions that they had in the school library, and they were all numbered. And I think all those sorts of influences sowed the seed for me to have a bit of a basic collection and then start building on it. And that's exactly what I did. But that was, decades ago. I was literally at school when I then started to sort of pick up those books. And I remember being slightly older, maybe 16, 17, and visiting a secondhand book dealer who was local to me. He had the first Pan paperback of Casino Royale, which I think I bought for about £12, the most I'd ever paid for a paperback at that time. And thinking, wow, this is so good. It's the poor man's hardback. Back then, I picked up the paperback first for £12. The first hardback of Casino Royale was like a couple of thousand. So I thought, well, I can get so much more value for money by buying paperback first than I could buying like hardback first. So that's another reason which sort of cemented me collecting vintage paperbacks over, say, vintage hardbacks. Just the price and better value for money. So although I started off collecting Pan and Penguin books and really sort of getting into it, back in the 80s and early 90s, when I started really starting to pick paperbacks up and go hunting for them, particularly in jumble sales and well, charity shops and things like that, and boot sales, car boot sales, I would often pick up job lots of old paperback books, and I'd have, I'd pick them up if there was like a box of Pan or a box of Penguin, but ordinarily there would be a few other books in there that were like related. They were also old sort of vintage paperbacks, and I never used to throw them away. So without really trying, I ended up having a few like vintage Albatross books and a few Badger books and Corgi and Panther and Foursquare, loads of these other British predominantly series that I now have big collections of, but they sort of formed a long, long time ago. I didn't actively go out and think, oh, I must collect Badger books. I sort of had a few already that had just sort of come my way. And nowadays, of course, I just add to that collection. It's the same with digit books. I mean, there's just countless, there's endless, endless series of old vintage paperbacks, and I never used to really chuck anything away. And of course, I also would find the odd American one, which was even better, because this is like, wow, this is from another land, and it's like totally different sort of artwork, a publisher I might not recognize. It was brilliant. So it was a very exciting time to be collecting vintage paperbacks back then, because they were just so plentiful. So it was around this time that I discovered the paperback fanzines. So there was Paperback Parade in America, and Justin Merritt had started publishing the Paperback Fanatic over here. Morris at Zardos had published his own one as well. Paperback Pulps and Comics, I think his was called. I also discovered the Penguin Collectors Society in about 93, 94. Quite a small society of dedicated penguin nuts, but I had to join really, didn't I? And that was leading up to the Penguin's 60th anniversary. I think when I started getting the American ones, like copies of Paperback Parade, that opened my eyes much more to the amazing world of American paperbacks. And also I started picking up a few books on paperbacks. So there was a definitive one, really, the first real analysis of vintage paperbacks, which is by Piet Schroeders. It was the book of paperbacks, which was published here in the UK as well as in America. And then I hunted down a few more books on vintage books, some by my friend Gary Levisi over in the States. He produced like a paperback price guide. So at least I had an idea of which books were sort of the most sought after and the most valuable whilst I was out. But for me, I was a little more unusual because I was collecting by the numbers. In a lot of cases, I would pick a publisher, Penguin, Pan, and I'd try and get every single number, which was a much harder proposition. But as I said, paperbacks back then in the 80s and 90s were stacks more plentiful than they are today, and they weren't as old, And the earliest Penguins were not even quite 60 years old, so they were still turning up. Nowadays, it's a much, much harder proposition, and generally, big collections are generally only going on the market when someone sadly passes away who's been a lifetime collector. But back then, it was just copies that people had bought over the years and were being disposed of, and they were so plentiful. It was a great time to be a paperback collector. I then started discovering lots of vintage paperback websites. Now, this was sort of the tail end of the 1990s, early 2000s, and there was websites devoted to all manner of things. Now, different genres, science fiction collecting different publishers. There was websites putting, cover galleries together. Now, sadly, and I guess this is a sign of the collecting hobby, that was, 25 years ago in a lot of cases. And those website creators, they've either passed on or the sites just have stopped being updated, maybe lack of traffic, who knows. But a lot of those resources that are there at the moment do make the most of them because they may not be there forever. And a lot of the information potentially has been lost. But there were some great online resources back then. And of course, that coincided with the rise of eBay and ABE Books and Biblio and all these other places where you could start to find rare books online. And sometimes the prices were crazy. Other times, particularly if you watched eBay quite a bit, you could pick up some absolutely incredible bargains. And that was all happening in the early 2000s. It was a very exciting time to be a paperback collector. So in 2010, Instagram came along. So I decided to jump on pretty early on, and I created my @Penguin Book a Day Instagram feed where I decided to share a single Penguin book from my collection each day. And I thought, well, even going by what I've got, I'd be going for years. So I thought it'd be just a little bit of fun. And then I was contacted by a chap called Mike Krieger. Now, I didn't know who he was at the time, but he was actually one of Instagram's co-founders. And he emailed me a picture or messaged me through the app, in fact, of his Penguin Shakespeare collection that he'd sort of collected and he'd used going through sort of college and that. And I thought, oh, how fantastic. And I replied, said, yeah, those are like the 70s editions. I've got these ones. I sent him back a picture of the original ones from the 40s. Anyway, didn't hear any more about it. I said, thanks very much. It was a brief exchange of emails. About a month later, I had an email from Instagram saying that my account had been selected to be featured on the front page. So when you signed up to the app, bearing in mind it went bananas from day one of the suggested accounts to follow would be Penguin Book a Day. So I thought, wow, I couldn't believe it. So they said, just get ready, you're going to be quite busy. And they were not wrong. So for a 2-week period, I was getting about 1,000 followers on Instagram a day. And it was absolutely bananas. You could watch your page, your Instagram page, and the follower count was going up literally in real time. And I thought, wow. So they did that for 2 weeks. And then next year they did it again for another couple of weeks, and I had it once more when they launched video. I did a few like little videos, and once again they were featured straight away on the front page, which was like absolutely amazing. So we've got that Instagram account up to about 30,000, which is just under that. It's about 29,500 as it stands right now. Although Instagram 14 years later, obviously it's not my main way of sharing content, but I still use Instagram and I use Twitter or X and Facebook, but YouTube is perhaps where it's definitely at. So in 2019, March in fact of that year, was when I first started sharing my collection of books and other bits and pieces here on YouTube. Now, it was a bit of a slow start. It took me 11 months until I hit my first 1,000 subscribers. It was very, very difficult to bring people from Instagram and Twitter to check out my long form videos here on YouTube. And lots of people do say that trying to get from one platform to another is quite tricky. But here we are now, basically just over 5 years later, and we're doing really well, I think you could say, at 26,500 subscribers as I film this today, and we get 60 to 70,000 views a month, which isn't bad considering I've pretty much stopped all the gaming content now simply for various copyright reasons. It's just not worth putting that sort of stuff up anymore. We'll stick to the books, and I think that's what I really, really am passionate about. So with all those years of experience behind me, I'm hoping that in this video I can give you a few more top tips, things to look out for if you're thinking of becoming a paperback collector, and definitely a few things and pitfalls to avoid. So the first big tip is just collect what you love. For me, it was always by publisher, sometimes by number, by series, but people collect by cover artist, obviously by author. They collect by genre, so people collect like boxing books or books with a particular thing on the cover. They collect cover artists. I know people who collect like Josh Kirby, for example, and collect anything that artist has ever done. There's so many different ways. Lots of people just collect science fiction. There's people who collect crime. If you take Penguin, for example, there are people who collect just the green crime. There's people who collect the cerise, travel and adventure crime. I mean, you just cannot believe it. And everyone's collecting is a little bit different. So as long as you're collecting stuff that you actually love, you've got nothing to worry about, because ultimately, even if the books aren't worth anything, you'll still have some books that you actually love reading. So yeah, just collect what you love is my absolute top tip. So I always suggest to people to just do your research. Whatever you decide to collect, become an expert in that particular field. So research it, look online, check websites, check any magazine articles, books, anything related to what you're actually planning to collect. So if you're thinking of getting into Penguin books, you've got to join the Penguin Collectors Society. If you're collecting Pan books, then you need to have read every single page of Tim Kitchen's excellent Pan Ticket.net Pan website, which is, got everything Pan related. So just do your research and become an expert. The other thing I would suggest is don't always buy from the same source. So there are people who, and because it's probably the easiest option, they just buy from eBay. Spread your wings a little bit if you're going to be online. Check ABE Books, check Biblio, check specialist dealer websites. You've got Zardos Books. You could be emailing paperback dealers, Cold Tonnage. I mean, there's loads of them around the UK. Just do a little Google search and email these people. Tell them the books that you're after. The other thing is try and buy from different places. So if you're out and about, this is definitely the case for me. If I'm going to a little town or somewhere I'm driving through that I've never been before, and I come across a bookshop, believe me, I'll be pulling in and checking it out. And you need to have that mentality. You need to be checking every source of possible vintage paperback action that you can possibly get, be that boot sales, charity shops, jumble sales. I mean, I remember going to vote, and there was it was in a church I'd never been to before. They had a box of books. Picked up a first Penguin of the Kraken Wakes by John Wyndham. You just never know what you're going to find. So always be on the radar, looking out for new sources and places to go to find books. One thing I definitely would recommend, if you can do it, is get down to the London Paperback Show. So it looks like it's back once every 8 months or so. And it's a fantastic resource. There'll be stalls and stalls full of paperbacks there, and that's just one option. So have a look at everything you can possibly think of that old paperbacks or old books might turn up at, and check them out, because eventually you will be very well rewarded. So my next tip is just buy the best you can. Now, one of the reasons a lot of people, including me, got into paperback collecting was because they were a cheap alternative to hardbacks. However, long term, it's a proven fact that by buying the best possible condition copies that you can afford over the long run, those are the ones that will pay back if you decide to sell your collection years down the line. So it's a big tip, but it is one that, it will pay off in spades, in years to come. Buy the best possible condition copies that you can find. The other one, which is something I've only now sort of come about really becoming a convert to, and that's bagging up your collection. Now, my very rarest books I always sort of bagged up in like comic bags, and I did keep them protected. However, I've made the decision now to pretty much try, and it's going to take probably a couple of years to bag up my entire paperback collection. Now, that's no small feat, but I'm doing it in small chunks, like 100 books or a box of books at a time, and it's quite manageable. They're not cheap, it's about £10–11 for 100 bags, so that's 10p per bag. But when some of these books, can be in 3 figures or more sometimes, you really, really ought to be looking after them. And you have to consider the age of these books as well. So, if I've got some of these books are fast approaching 100 years old now. In fact, I've got books that are now over 100 years old in my collection. They, beyond all the other ones, definitely need some sort of protection to keep them looking as good and to prevent them from being accidentally damaged just by handling. So, yeah, definitely bag your books. So the next tip is a bit of a funny one, but it may seem obvious, but if you come across a rare paperback in the world, something that is, super collectible, even if it's not something that you actually collect, just pick it up. Don't leave it behind, because if it's in a charity shop, there's a risk it may be just chucked in the bin. It takes someone with that little bit of knowledge to know what you've got or what you may have come across, and then at the very worst, stick it up on eBay or somewhere like that to give an actual collector a chance at grabbing it, because you never know when you might see another one. Keep it back, keep a little store of reserves which you can trade with other collectors. Believe me, that definitely does still happen. There's lots of trading goes on at the London Paperback Show, and I've certainly got boxes of swaps which I do my occasional sales videos on. So if you come across a rare book, don't leave it behind just because you've got it. Definitely pick it up, because you can trade it with another collector down the line. Okay, so a few, not really pitfalls, but a few things to consider if you're thinking about becoming a paperback collector. So first of all, can you even afford it? So you need to set realistic goals. If you're thinking of collecting the first 1,000 Penguin books in first edition, well, that nowadays is an awful lot of money. 30 odd years ago when I started, I was picking rarities up for just a pound or two out in the wild. That's just not the case nowadays, and rare books are going for big money. Just last week, some rare wartime crime titles were going for over £500 each on eBay, which is just astonishing. Don't forget, I still need the one book, which is Death on the Borough Council by Josephine Bell, just in case anyone watching has got a copy of that, to finish my run of the first 1000 Penguins in first edition. Something that a journey I've been on for over 35 years now, and it's still not complete. So, don't collect beyond your means. However, saying that, you can go to the other extreme. Say you're just collecting vintage science fiction, where you could go to Morris's warehouse, all you need is books, and he's got an entire retail premises full of books. Probably 90% of it is science fiction, and everything's priced at just £1. I mean, talk about go along and fill your boots. Come away with carrier bagfuls. I mean, just incredible. Which sort of leads me on to the next point, which is, have you got the room? So the biggest concern I hear from most collectors is, I just don't have the space. I hear it all the time, and I'm in the same boat. You can see in the video that we've done today, I've started in the studio. Don't have many books in there, but then we went into the office, which is packed. Then we went into the bedroom, which is also full up with stuff on the dressing table there. Then I went into the landing, which has also got a bookcase which is full up. Now we're up here in the loft. Now that doesn't show you all the boxes of books that are in boxes. They're in comic boxes, double lined, waiting for that day when they can go into my dream library. Most of the bookcases you've seen today are double stacked. There's stacks of books with another row in front of them. And every single collector I know moans about the lack of space. So this is a very, very serious consideration. Have you got enough room for everything that you're intending to buy? Or, have you got a nice wall that you think, right, this is going to be my dedicated science fiction library. Can't wait to start collecting vintage paperbacks and I get into collecting Pan books. Before you know it, you are literally overrun with them. And, well, what are you going to do? My only suggestion, and this is something that Steve the Outlaw Bookseller does very, very well, which incidentally I forgot to mention, but there are some great resources if you're becoming a paperback collector right here on YouTube. So most of the big channels I do follow myself now, but have a little look around. There's plenty doing vintage paperbacks. However, what I would suggest, so Steve, a noted science fiction collector and author, he only buys the absolute tip-top condition books because he just doesn't have the room for them. So he's making his perfect library. And when he does buy a paperback or even a hardback, his standards are 10 out of 10, because if it's going to be in the library, it needs to be pristine or it hasn't earned its place. Now, it's a really good mindset to have when you're short of space. However, with me, I just can't resist it. If I find a rare book, even if it's low grade, and I haven't got it, it's going to be kept in there as a filler until a better one comes along. That's always been my mentality, and I think it probably always will. But space has to be your number one priority. So ultimately, are you going to find paperback collecting a rewarding hobby? Certainly for me, it's been fantastic, and I just love the thrill of the hunt, finding that missing volume, just generally going out and enjoying being a paperback collector. When I look at my collection now and I go up to, say, my Penguin books here, and I pull out an odd crime one. Now this is a very, very nice one. It's not one I've ever read before. Penguin number 239. Got that number in from 1939. I know it's a first print. It's a crime one. I don't know anything about this, but I do know that, it's 85 years old now, and this is my little window back into 1939. I can read this book as if it had just been published, and really it's almost intangible how you feel when you sit down and read an original copy of a vintage paperback of this sort of age. It's just really quite something. And I'm sure if you're a paperback collector and you're tucking into a nice book from the 50s or 60s, you will know exactly the feeling that I'm trying to describe. I did make a video a couple of years ago, and it was called The Magical World of Vintage Paperbacks. And I do show you lots and lots of different sorts of things that people collect, by author, by publisher, by number, by cover artist. And I will link to that video at the end because I think it's a really good introduction if you're thinking of becoming a paperback collector. So there you are. I hope you've found this a little bit useful, a bit of food for thought, perhaps, if you're thinking of diving in to become a paperback collector. But definitely it's such a great, great hobby. Definitely on the increase at the moment. There's lots of collectors of all different genres. So now is, just as good a time as any to dive in and start having some fun, particularly when the current book market is a bit rubbish, to be honest. There's so much great stuff in history for us to enjoy. So I think you should just dive in and do it. Anyway, thank you very much for watching today. If you want more paperback content, there's a whole host of it on my channel. Almost 1,000 videos now, so do go back and check out some of the backlist, and I look forward to seeing you again very soon. Bye.